Welcome to Perspectivas, Global Talks on Higher Education, the podcast of the UNESCO's International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, IESALC, a global space for dialogue and promotion of higher education for all.
So welcome to today's episode of Perspectivas, Global Talk on Higher Education, where we explore the topic transition from K-12 to higher education. How is AI different across educational contexts? This afternoon, I am your host, Emmanuel Owusu. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting two distinguished panelists, Francesc Pedró, Director at UNESCO IESALC, and Shafika Isaacs, UNESCO's Chief of Section on Technology and AI in Education. Together, we will discuss the evolving role of artificial intelligence as it moves from K-12 to higher education setting, the unique challenges this transition presents, and opportunities that arise when integrating AI in different educational environments. This session is part of our ongoing efforts to engage young leaders and diverse stakeholders in advancing transformative ideas in higher education. Welcome, Francesc and Shafika. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. Shafika and Francesc, are you there? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think we both here. Thank you very much, Emmanuel.
Okay, great. So we'll start in a moment. We have 3 sessions, and we'll start with the first session segment, which this question goes to both of you. But I'll start with Shafika. So we'll look at, given the global trend of AI adoption in educational setting, can you please highlight the 2 main challenges you observe as institutions transition from K-12 to higher education? Shafika?
Sure. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I think that this is quite an important question because it forces us to consider the way education systems are structured. And often we talk mainly about the experiences in the K-12 sector, and we talk separately about the experiences of AI adoption and digital integration in the higher education sectors, including TVET and university systems, often as separate systems and disconnected silos. In posing the question in the way you've done, causes us to consider that, in fact, one integrated, and some people refer to it as a K-20 ecosystem, that schooling, higher education system should actually be considered as an integrated ecosystem. And when we adopt that lens, we see that national systems, they often exhibit discontinuities, structural discontinuity, including in AI integration in the schools to higher education pipeline. And so we know that in most education contexts, in both the global north and in the global south, but more pronounced in the global south, these structural discontinuities prevail at much deeper levels, and that AI and digital technologies have tended to provide additional layers that reproduces and amplifies prevailing inequalities. And so if I had to consider 2 distinct problems or challenges along this pipeline, then what stands out for me is the most glaring challenge that we are still faced with globally, and predominantly in the global south, and predominantly in a continent like Africa, where I've spent a lot of time, is that there is still a very widespread digital divide. Some people refer to it as an infrastructural apartheid. So we are aware that there are highly uneven levels of access to digital infrastructure, which the ITU calls, disconnects and divide in terms of meaningful connectivity, in terms of devices, skills, and content. And now with AI technologies, there's a reinforcement of divide, that level of digital inequality in terms of the unequal levels of access, not just within the schooling communities, but also in the pipeline from schools to universities, as it is often experienced by students. So I often use the example of a student from a rural school in an African country where there's sometimes up to 80% lack of stable electricity and also lack of access to digital resources like good devices, good connectivity, good content in local languages, arriving at an urban university that often in many cases are a lot more and better resourced. We know that many of our urban universities in the Global South have AI labs. And now this student who's not been exposed to these more advanced technologies are now having to navigate AI labs that are dependent on more advanced GPUs that they've never had access to before. And what that tends to do is generate what is sometimes referred to as a digital shock, because their first encounter with these more advanced technologies at undergraduate level, for which they are not prepared, reinforces an already existing cultural alienation that we know many, many students face in the first year and throughout the undergraduate experience at universities. And so on top of the already cultural alienation, misrecognition that students tend to experience when they get to university, there is also the cultural design of prevailing AI tools that are exclusionary, they are urban-centric, they do not always include indigenous languages, and that just compounds these digital shocks and reinforces existing inequalities. And they take many different forms. And so I think these continues to be a prevailing and enduring challenge. AI potentially reinforces in terms of reinforcing structural inequalities. Second, I think, is a pedagogical fragmentation. And again, this is highly context dependent. If students coming from schooling systems where they may well have been exposed to some level of AI consumption, in schools, there's a more predominant approach to the adoption of AI, that people, students and teachers tend to use general purpose AI technologies, large language models, and there's a stronger use approach compared to at universities. There's a approach to the design and the creation of technologies, and there are ecosystems to enable the creation and the design of technologies. So that too creates further fragmentation where you are primarily trained to consume and not produce and design. You're going into ecosystem that is more centered on a creation culture.
Wow.
That also causes further alienation. And I think that those are two still dominant challenges that I think that we need to.
Great. Thank you, Shafika. That was quite an elaborate response on this question. Let me move to Francesc. Francesc, could you kindly also give us your response on the question? Would you want me to repeat the question for you?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I got it.
Great.
And I think that I can certainly start by saying that it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with Shafika. But I am expected, I guess, to represent a different perspective, the perspective of higher education institutions. And let me start by saying that most of what Shafika has already said is absolutely, so to say, supported by the evidence from the several higher education institutions, particularly as she has referred to in the Global South. Now, maybe let me start by saying something that is nothing to do with AI, and is simply to remind ourselves that the transition from schools to higher education remains one major issue all over the world. First of all, because not all students who have graduated from high school or secondary education have the opportunity to get access to higher education. Many of them stop in secondary education their educational itinerary. So that's the first point. Second, which I think is also very important, precisely because the transition is so complicated, particularly for students coming from vulnerable populations or disadvantaged groups, we have those really concerning figures about the dropouts during the first academic year in universities, that in some cases can be as high of 70 to 80%. So in a way, transition, that's the point I wanted to make to supplement what Shafika has said, is a challenge, no matter if we are heavy users of AI or not. Now, if you add the layer of AI, then it turns to be that we are talking about two different universes, so to say. On the one hand, in the school sector, you can have governments who are already engaged in making sure that there are national regulations about the use of AI in the schools, either for limiting the risks or promoting the use, or both things. And you also have a majority of countries that lack that type of policies. Of course, when you look at higher education, you are going to be, let me use the word that Shafika has used in a different way, we're going to see a very fragmented scenario where even in the same country, you have institutions that have their own policies in the use of what we call the autonomy, which is a privilege of higher education institutions. So you will have countries where some institutions have a policy and some others don't or do not yet. Okay, so in a way, that's the first challenge. How a country, a government, which is the expression, that's an assumption certainly, but is the expression of the willingness of a particular society to go about, among other things, the development of citizenship, how a country can combine a context where it has some regulatory tools, like in the school sector, with a context where it has a limited capacity because of the autonomy of higher education institutions. That would be a first challenge. So there is a lot more dialogue needed between schools, governments, and higher education institutions. Second point is certainly the differences that we see in those countries where the students have already had the opportunity to be trained or to be using some AI tools during the at least secondary education, compared to others where this is still a dream but not really a real opportunity. Of course, when you arrive to university, and sometimes, most of the time, you are left to yourself. So you are, expected to have a very independent approach to your study activities. Of course, there is a huge difference if you know that there is a plethora of AI applications that, in principle, can do the hard work for you while you rest and watch films in your dormitory, so to say, or if you have already been trained about the proper use of those tools. And in particular, you have been accompanied during the secondary school and maybe the first years of your university in what I would call a professional use of those tools. So in other terms, I think that the second challenge is about the readiness gap that we can still find. And of course, I mean, Shafika has already mentioned it. We have that readiness gap across regions in the world as well. So in particular, in developing countries, in the global south, certainly, we can engage in this conversation, but still practices are very far from those that are already, becoming the majority in the global north. So thank you.
Great.
Back to you, Emmanuel.
Great. Amazing responses. And next segment, I want us to look at innovative practices and challenges in AI integration. And I'll start with you, Francesc. I would want us to share with us, give us insight into UNESCO IESALC's initiatives involving AI in higher education. And I want you to share with us what has been the Institute's approach in leveraging AI to enhance teaching, learning, research outcomes, and how do you envisage its evolution in the coming years? And I'd want you to keep it a bit brief so that we can manage our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, but this is a quite complicated question, and I don't think I have the full answer to share with you.
Yes.
Let's say that
yes.
our institute is part of UNESCO, and we have strengths, but certainly we are committed to work together with other members of the UNESCO family, including Shafika's team, to make sure that we have a concerted approach to the use of AI in higher education. When it comes to our institute in particular, I can say that we have been examining, so to say, innovative practices in AI implementation across higher education globally. I would say that we have been rather watching the developments more than driving them. But certainly, in cooperation with other UNESCO colleagues, we are planning to unfold what we call an AI competency framework for both students and teachers in higher education. So to build that framework, our contribution from the Institute has been focusing on documenting, I would say, case studies of success of AI integration in teaching, learning, and administration across diverse higher education contexts, but having a special, I would say, interest in the developments in the global south, because that's where really UNESCO can make a huge difference. One of our core initiatives certainly has been the development of guiding frameworks for AI governance in higher education. We have been consulting with institutions, for instance, in particular in Latin America and the Caribbean, where our institute is located, to understand how they are approaching questions of data privacy, the transparency in the use of algorithms, and certainly what they understand by an ethical implementation of AI tools. Our consultations, not completed yet, I mean, there's just what I'm sharing is just an appetizer, have informed in a way our policy briefs and recommendations that aim to support governments in the development of new strategies. For instance, just a few days ago, the Institute launched a report on the contribution of higher education to the national AI strategies, because certainly, one can think that AI tools can be used for teaching and learning within higher education institutions, but also our countries expect our institutions to contribute to research, capacity development of professionals, no matter in which discipline, capable of using AI tools efficiently. So we have certainly done our best to make sure that our research highlighted how existing inequalities, and I would like to insist on what Shafika already mentioned at the beginning, how existing inequalities also in higher education can be, in a way, exacerbated when AI tools are implemented without the due consideration of access and equity issues. Certainly, that particular focus of how to link AI developments that we cannot stop, that we should support with our commitment with equity is really a difficult one to solve. Same applies to a second area, which Stefania Giannini, the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, has many times highlighted, is how can we combine the commitment of higher education institutions for new developments such as AI and AI technologies, and more in general, the digitalization, with a world that needs to look carefully about how we use, in a sustainable way, limited resources. Now, yet another challenge. And frankly, let me just maybe close my contribution here, that looking ahead, and I would like to say that our work, we plan it to evolve toward greater emphasis on supporting South-South exchanges on AI use in higher education. Because, I mean, you always gain something from looking at the big names in higher education. We all know that. But the question here, particularly seen from the perspective of our institute, is how an institution like mine, which is working in the global South, can make an effective use of the available tools and capacities in my case, and what can I learn from institutions also in the global South that operate in a similar context. So I think that certainly everyone would like to be fully engaged, but we have to be also aware of our capacities. And that's why that kind of South-South network among institutions like the one our institute is supporting is so impactful, because it provides peer learning opportunities among institutions that share the same limitations, concerns, but also expectations. That will be it from my side. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Amazing. That's quite broad on what your institution is doing. And so, yes, we commend you on that. And to Shafika, can you share with us your perspective on the main differences in AI adoption between K-12 and higher education setting? Additionally, we also want you to share what policy measures or institutional support do you believe are essential to bridge this gap and facilitate smoother transition from integrating AI in education. I know Francesc has said a lot, but we'll be very happy if you can manage the response for us.
Sure, thank you, Emmanuel, and I share Francesc's sentiment that the process of AI diffusion in our education systems across the world is still very much an emergent and very rapidly changing process. And it is also structurally highly unequal and uneven. If one takes a global view, we do have a situation where almost every week there are new AI models being released. And we hear stories, and they're mainly anecdotes of early adopters, especially in more wealthier resource schooling environments, for instance. We know that the private schools have tended to be early adopters of new technologies as they come on stream, particularly AI technologies, and that we also know that the vast majority and many learners and millions of teachers are reportedly unfamiliar, have never heard of AI. And so those chasms, those structural inequalities continue to prevail as the changes and the rapid emergence of AI technologies come on stream in our systems. So from the insights that we've gained at UNESCO in our engagement with member states, just last week I spoke to about 700 teachers from Trinidad and Tobago. We are appreciating that AI adoption, use, and integration in K-12 and higher education settings is is very highly context dependent. And as I've said earlier, quite uneven and unequal. However, there does appear to be discernible patterns of AI use between the K-12 sector and the higher education sector. So one discernible area, I think, appears to be the nature and the depth of AI integration use. So the literature and some of our own experience at UNESCO suggests that in schools, especially in the wealthier schools where AI integration has been more pronounced, there appears to be a focus on the consumption of existing general purpose AI tools like GPT and Gemini and so on. And there are exceptions. At UNESCO, we hosted a private school in the UK, for instance, who established an AI classroom based on their own homegrown AI platform. And that classroom is also designed to be what they call a teacherless classroom, where the students are actually taught by an AI teacher. And there's some 2 or 3 support teachers, but mostly they are apps. And so we see that that is already beginning of AI-led classroom and an AI-led teacher is already beginning to emerge within the global ecosystem, even though at this stage they are still highly exceptional and mostly confined to private, very wealthy private schooling conditions. Overall, however, including in relatively resourced public schools, consumption model of still just using existing largely corporate AI tools have tended to predominate. And so the consumption patterns relate mainly to educational use, often also for entertainment, but for educational use. And they are not often applied to real world context. And there are many examples that I can cite. But in public schools, there have also been an approach to basic AI awareness and literacy in more resource settings. And in some cases, limited school policies have also been developed. If we look at the higher education institutions, there is a discernible pattern between TVET colleges and universities. The case of universities, from what we know in African universities, for example, the approach is towards more advanced research development, investment in AI, whereas in TVET colleges, the approach tends to be towards using AI to develop job-ready skills. And again, there are quite a number of examples across the world. At universities, the research agenda is often either experimental and sometimes quite abstract, or based on partnerships with industry to spin off. And we've just heard at UNESCO the experience in South Korea where private universities partner with industries to spin off AI startup, where they're experimenting also with new emerging tools that they've designed.
Right, Shafika.
Some of the institutional policy implications, very briefly, is that as UNESCO, we've also advocated in basic education, in K-12 education, the adoption of critical AI literacy linked to broader critical adoption of AI in the curriculum, teacher development, investment in teacher development are important policy responses to ensuring that we move beyond this consumption model in schools. And then I think in universities and TVET, we've actually seen policy and strategy approaches that encourages bridges between schools and TVET colleges and bridges between universities and schools in terms of AI design, in terms of supporting teachers. I think that if those become policy imperatives, that is certainly one way in which we can ensure that there's a more sort of structured continuity from schooling to the higher education sector, and those come to mind as two immediate policy recommendations, I think, that emerges from our experience today.
Great. I mean, these are wonderful thoughts that you're sharing with us, and it's amazing to hear that. And as the conversation gets very interesting, we also have to be mindful of our time and how long we express that. And so, yes, we want to now discuss the key essential factors and stakeholder roles. And I would this question would go to both of you, but I'll start with Francesc, and I would want you to tell us the essential factors that need to be addressed when implementing AI solutions during the transition from K-12 to higher education. And furthermore, also, I would want to know the key stakeholders, i.e. governments, educational institutions, technology partners, the role they play in ensuring successful and ethical integration. I would want you to look at that for us, but in brief. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll try to do that in a very brief form, because I think that it's difficult to really to agree on what would be the essential factors for the development of something that is still developing, so it's quite complicated. But anyway, looking back at other similar issues that we have faced in relation to the transition from schools to higher education, I would say that, first of all, probably there are three essential factors. The first one is faculty development. And I think that this is something where UNESCO can make a difference. Certainly, there are universities that have already set up their own capacity development initiatives, but when it comes particularly to institutions in the Global South, we need to ensure that UNESCO provides that kind of support required for faculty development. I think that this, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think that now we are talking about AI use, but the whole issue of faculty development is a must, because the quality of the teaching and learning experience has to be improved. And certainly, it is the only way by which we can reduce those amazing, dramatic rates of dropouts during the first academic year. The second factor I would like to mention is probably what I would call policy coherence, because as I mentioned already, there is a kind of divide between the national digital education strategies for schools and what is happening in the higher education sector. I think that these disconnects create confusion in our societies, in students, in educators alike. And I think that UNESCO needs to advocate for a more integrated policy approach that recognizes that what matters here is not the tool, but the learner's interest, and that the learners needs to experience an entire educational journey, no matter whether he or she is in a school or in a TVET institution or in higher education. And the third essential factor, you could expect this from UNESCO, is probably access equity. I think that transitions between educational levels, as I said, exacerbate digital divides, socioeconomic divides, and support structures that are very common in schools may disappear when students enter higher education. This is particularly the case for students from vulnerable groups or marginalized communities. Now, when it comes to you, Emmanuel, asked about the stakeholder roles. Let me put it very briefly. Governments need to develop more coherent policy frameworks that help bridge the currently, I don't know how to call it, siloed approaches between schools and higher education. Now, educational institutions must invest in transition support programs, including certainly capacity development for instructors, that explicitly address the changes in expectations around the use of AI tools. And well, I haven't mentioned that, but certainly technology partners, technology providers need to engage more meaningfully with educational objectives rather than simply marketing solutions. I think that one of the most traditional problems we have had when it comes to the use of digital tools in education, and I hope that Shafika will agree with me because she knows far more than I do, is certainly that the industry sells solutions for different problems because they see the problems from a different perspective than teachers themselves see with their own eyes. So I think that the message here is that please, technology partners, put yourself at the service of real teachers having real and actual problems in their schools and higher educations. I think that all in all, I would like to conclude that maybe what we need is to ensure that UNESCO serves as a platform for more dialogue opportunities between schools, higher education stakeholders, and certainly governments from our member states. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Francesc. Let's see what Shafika would have to say, whether she agrees with you or she has a counter opinion. Shafika, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. And I'm certainly very much aligned with Francesc's approach. I think across the schools to AI pipeline, AI also tends to expose deeper systemic challenges that have their own peculiarities at local level. For example, we are learning, as I've said earlier, a lot more about the alienation and the misrecognition of first-year students, undergraduate students who come from poor communities, and how AI runs the risk of deepening that, and that institutional cultures in themselves are also alienating, and that sometimes and often makes that worse. So what this means from a policy perspective is that you know, outside of just the AI equation, and there I also share Francesc's perspective that higher education institutions need to, at the outset, have as an institutional policy the development of the recognition and be more inclusive and develop the cognitive agency of students by actively involving them and engaging with them in more participatory ways. And so when it comes to AI use and AI design, what that then also means is that students be engaged with as you know, as thinking equal partners in the design of AI technologies, that they not just be considered as consumers, and that they actually be included in the co-design of AI tools. And we've got a few examples across the world, such as, for example, in Brazil, they have a Youth AI Ethics Council, where young people are actively engaged in co-designing AI tools from an ethical perspective, and they engage industry through the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. And that kind of approach sees students and young people as active agents in the co-design tools. And a number of these examples exist across the world where this participatory design approach is something that we must also encourage the industry players to engage students and to engage teachers as co-designers of the tools themselves, and that at the heart of that also sits the ethical design of these tools. So we have advocated consistently as UNESCO this concept of ethics by design, and appealing also to the corporates to ensure they put in place systems and that we also open up possibilities for engagement to ensure that their products are actually designed ethically at the outset. And the best way to do that is to actively engage students and teachers in using it. That's the first part. That's the concept of participatory design, user-centered design, and that co-owned by students, teachers in the design of AI technologies, ethical perspective. Second is sharing from view that we've seen the value in the awareness raising capacity program that we've been part of so far amongst teachers and school leaders. And we've sometimes been quite taken aback by the depth of misunderstanding, lack of awareness that does warrant every country, every Ministry of Education, every institution in education to prioritize the awareness raising, the capacity building of teachers and leaders at universities, at TVET colleges, and in schools. I've just done a whole process with Ministry of Education in Trinidad and Tobago, and we've seen the immense value of the sensitization process as a basis for developing a more system-wide teacher AI capability development program that also leverages the frameworks that UNESCO has released on AI competencies for teachers, AI competencies for students. And these frameworks actually opens up the space for, on the one hand, governments and ministries to adopt policies around teacher capacity, institutional leadership in AI, and also offers a basis for the implementation of how those capacity programs, capacity building programs can be designed. And we stand ready to partner with many member states, many institutions to operationalize the framework. Those are the two examples that I can contribute to the already really substantive contribution.
Great. Great. Thank you, Shafika and Francesc, on this wonderful points that you shared on the essential factors and stakeholder roles. We are getting to a close of this podcast. And so as we wrap up, could both of you share your final takeaway for our audience on how AI can transform education during this transition, and what steps are most critical for effective implementation? And so these are the few takeaways that we want to hear from you, and we want it in brief. Thank you. So let's hear from you, Francesc.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, very briefly. I think my very last thought that I wanted to share with the audience is a very simple one. I mean, we started this conversation because we seem to be urged to have a common approach to AI use in education. But my my plea would be, look, let's find ways by which we have a more profound conversation about how can we make sure that the learner's journey from day zero in a preschool institution up to the PhD is seamless. I mean, we need to make sure, as I've seen already in some countries, we need to make sure that university professors know more about how the new generations are. And that means that they have to find opportunities maybe for teaching in high schools, maybe just one credit or two, because it's also a way of making sure that those students who never would think about continuing their education in higher education, they see that, approaching them, looking for them, providing them with an expectation of, of success. So I would say that this is the first thing. And second, I mean, that's also a reality. I think that many secondary schools prepare for a higher education experience that doesn't exist anymore. What I mean by that is that it's not true anymore that most of the teaching in higher education is about lecturing. I mean, for good or bad, it is not anymore the case. So if you are in a secondary school, you also need to understand how higher education institutions and teachers operate in today's world. Now, let's address first the need for this, I would say, educational continuity, having the focus on not on the tools, but on the student. And because when we do that, then we will appreciate, in which way we can or we have to modulate the use of the tools. But let's focus first on what matters most, which is the student's experience. Thank you, Emmanuel. Back to you.
Thank you, Francesc. Over to you, Shafika, your final takeaway.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'll also be very brief. I think for me, a final takeaway is the value of an integrated approach across the pipeline is a crucial lens that we need to adopt when we think about AI adoption in our education systems, and that we need to prioritize with absolute urgency the structural inequalities within that pipeline. And one of the ways to do that is to democratize AI design through participatory, empowering methodologies, designing not for students, but designing with students, with teachers. And I think that that's perhaps the most resounding takeaway and lesson that we've also learned from UNESCO's AI competency framework for students, that says that for teachers and students, that in addition to working for and producing tools for students, they need to be engaged actively with and produced by students as well as teachers. So that's the one important message, the democratization of the design of AI through participatory methodologies. The second is that I think that there is also an urgency to find strategies to engage with the corporate sector in a far more emphatic ways than we currently have, because of the very powerful role that they play in not just producing AI tools and systems that are diffusing into our systems, but also influencing our systems in very profound ways in terms of how these tools are adopted. And I think that UNESCO is also very well placed to act as a convener of deeper dialogues and engagement, certainly with the corporate sector, around ensuring that we are in fact designing and releasing into our systems technologies that are ethical, that are trustworthy, and that do not reinforce inequalities and biases that makes our systems worse off than they already are. And I think that that for me is a second very important urgency as a takeaway also from this discussion. Thank you.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much, Francesc and Shafika, for your insightful views on the transition from K-12 to higher education and the distinct role AI plays in this path. I think your responses have been very remarkable. They have covered both the challenges and exciting opportunities ahead as we strive for innovative, equitable educational systems. And to our listeners, we hope today's discussion has been very supportive and very inclusive and has addressed the critical issues, the critical reflection issues on responsible AI as a catalyst for positive change in education. If you did enjoy this episode, please subscribe to Perspectivas Global Talk on Higher Education. Don't leave it there. Share with friends and colleagues who are passionate about education and innovation. Please connect with us on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and join the conversation. Connect with us via UNESCO IESALC on these social media handles that I just mentioned. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you another time. Bye-bye.
We look forward to meeting you soon in this UNESCO IESALC space, and thank you for being part of our community.